Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Scream Sister. This is your friendly neighborhood podcast for spooky movies and spooky books. I am your host, Valerie.
And I'm Veronica.
Yeah, and we are two sisters coming to you from Texas. We are also two Latinas, and we mention that because number one, it's awesome. We're really proud of that fact. But the other reason we mention it is because Latinos, the Latino population is very big on scary films. There are numbers to back this up. And this is stuff that we have mentioned before in previous episodes, documentation about that you can read more about on our website, screamsister.com. But yeah, it is sort of kind of well-known fact at this point that Latinos are big lovers of films and scary films in particular. Do we like participating in scary stuff? No, I would not say that that's necessarily true, but we love watching it. We love hearing about it. We love exploring it from the safety of our couches in our own homes. So that's a little bit about us. Ron, I know I had asked you right before we started recording, I had asked you how you're doing. And I know that you had mentioned that through this podcasting effort, this has emboldened you to want to start your recording career.
My singing career.
Your singing career. And I was mentioning to Ron that just like a weekend before last, we watched they cloned Tyrone on Netflix. So if you haven't checked that movie out yet, guys, I recommend that you do. It was such an enjoyable film, really spooky and well done and funny. So Jamie Foxx, John Boyega, a bunch of other great people. It's just a really awesome story. So it should be blowing up a lot more. And so if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's on Netflix.
Yeah, I had not even heard of it at all, considering the big names that appear to be in it. I had not heard a word about it.
Well, I don't know if they're honestly, I haven't looked into like who are the people that have produced these films, but Jamie Foxx also recently put out that film. I think it's called Day Shift. Did you ever check out Day Shift on Netflix?
Not heard of that one either.
Well, that's another fun one. That one is again kind of horror comedy. It's very much centered around like vampire hunting and a world of vampires. I think it takes place in like Los Angeles or somewhere in California. So it's Jamie Foxx again, this time teaming up with what's his name? It's gonna bother me. Hang on, I'm gonna look it up now. James.
We'll edit.
Well, not kid, but like I'm old. He is not. James Franco.
McAvoy?
Dave Franco. I'm sorry. James Franco's older brother. We're going to edit this out and make me look cooler than I am right now. But Jamie Foxx and Dave Franco, who is related to James Franco. Is that even his name? James Franco? Like I'm blanking. Yeah, James Franco. I had it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's another fun one. Yeah, check that out too if you haven't. We enjoyed that one a lot. So today, Ronnie and I are launching into a truly like beloved little nugget of Mexican folklore, something that we've all grown, if you're Hispanic like we are, that you have certainly grown up knowing about. Even if you're not Hispanic, if you've grown up in like anywhere in Southwest United States, Texas in particular, I think you're going to probably know who this legend is. We're going to be talking about La Llorona, because it's such a staple in Mexican tradition and Mexican lore. So where I wanted to kind of start us off, Ron, is I wanted, first of all, for us to kind of give listeners a little bit of background, because everything that Ronnie and I know about the legend of La Llorona, you hear from your parents. So if you, like us, heard stories from your parents, then you probably have a similar account of the legend. So Ron, before we get into our parents and what they have had to say about this, I wanted to ask, like, what do you know outside of like anything that we've looked at for the purposes of this episode, or from anything that we heard from like mom and dad who gave us an accounting of what their understanding of it is? What have you heard growing up about La Llorona or in pop culture, anything like that?
The only thing that I ever heard, like I don't recall anyway, growing up knowing like any sort of extensive backstory to La Llorona. The only thing I ever recall being told was that she drowned her two children and then kind of was heard thereafter, forever after, particularly at night, just always kind of wailing and crying for mis hijos, donde están mis hijos? Where are my children? But I never knew why she drowned them or what her fate was. It was just kind of, and oddly enough, La Llorona apparently only lived down in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. Like when we were up in Victoria, which is where Valerie and I grew up, never seemed to hear about La Llorona there from our parents. So I guess she didn't migrate that far up north. I don't know. But yeah, I never really knew why she drowned her children. And I guess when I was young, I never thought to ask. But yeah, just that she would always be heard wailing and crying, and if you heard her, it was like a bad sign.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's similar thing. Like I'm realizing as you're saying it, it's not like it was never really explained to me why she drowned her children, but that was the story that we heard, that she drowned her children and then she is like doomed to walk the rest of eternity mourning her children and looking for children to claim as her own, essentially. And then,
Mhm.
yeah, like it was something we definitely grew up hearing. And I kind of just assumed that everyone in Texas, I think a lot
Mm.
of people have heard that name, but they don't know the legend. And the reason I say that is because like there was a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, when I was at Party City, and there was a girl in front of me in line buying a La Llorona costume, and she gets up to this is just something that I overheard, and she gets up to the counter and she's paying for it, and the cash register woman the service woman is helping her ring up, and she's saying, "Hey, do you know the story of La Llorona?" And the girl's like, "No, is there a story of La Llorona?" And I just remember kind of like balking at that. I'm like, "What? Like, what do you mean you don't know the story of La Llorona?" And I think I texted one of my friends and I was like, admittedly, I made this comment. I was like, I think there's like this white girl buying this La Llorona costume and she's never heard of the legend. And my friend, to her credit, rightly so, called me out. She's like, "Well, how do you know she's white? She could be anything." And I'm like, "Well, that's true. I don't want to be like, colorist or something like that and label her as white when she may not be white." But I posit that I don't think that she was Hispanic in any way, because I think if she was, she would know the legend of La Llorona. So,
At least heard the tale. I will say that when I was telling Robert, and Robert is my husband, for those of you that don't know, which would be all of you, because why
would be
would you know that?
everybody.
Anyway, I was telling Robert that we were doing this podcast on La Llorona, and he actually knew a little bit more than me in terms of backstory, because he had always grown up hearing that she had drowned her two children because I guess the father of the children either left her for, he had heard like two versions. The father of her children had either left her for another woman, or else she was interested in a man who wasn't interested in children. So in
Mhm.
either case, either story, she drowned them either in a fit of jealous rage, or just, and immediately regretted it afterwards, apparently. But the deed
Yeah.
was done. But so
Yeah.
he knew a tiny bit more than I grew up hearing.
Yeah. So that's the extent of it. And I now, as I've grown up and done some more, because, like everybody else, I'm very fascinated with this legend. So as I've done more reading about it, I've heard that as well. For the purposes of this episode, Ronnie and I wanted to get feedback from our parents, because our mom and dad are obviously the best sources of information for us when it comes to a lot of this stuff, a lot of this history. Honestly and truly, I really recommend it, guys. If you are fortunate enough to have living parents and you have good relations with them, or any elders, any relatives that you might have ties to, I think there's a lot of value in talking to those elders, maybe interviewing them, maybe getting that footage down if you can, kind of recording that history. One of my favorite authors, Clint Smith, who's also a writer for The Atlantic, is the author of How the Word is Passed, really great book. And he kind of talks about the importance of really documenting the history of your elders and your relatives, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do it while you can, while they're alive, while they're still here. Ronnie and I kind of asked our mom and dad for their account of what they grew up hearing, with regards to La Llorona. And so we have separate accounts, because typically mom and dad would like send us one spiel, and it would be written by mom, and it would be like, "This is for the both of us." And I wanted to be specific. I'm like, "No, I want to hear from the both of you about this." So I want to hear mom's account and dad's account. Ron, you have dad's account of it, of the
Yes.
lore. And I was hoping that you could read that for us, and then I was going to read what Mom sent us.
So I'm just going to read straight from what my father wrote. My childhood memories of La Llorona are fairly typical with those that have been shared over the years. The legend itself is about a mother that supposedly drowned her kids or was somehow responsible for their deaths. And it was the guilt of her inaction, and it was the guilt of her actions or lack thereof that drove her to roam the banks of rivers and waterways everywhere in search of her kids. The story goes that her screams of mis hijos could be heard at night as she searched for them. It's important to put in context the fact that swimming pools were not commonplace for poor kids growing up in the barrios and colonias. The only option for swimming were the local watering holes, lakes, or canals, none of which provided lifeguards or even adult supervision. My brothers and I learned how to swim in one of these canals with no one around that would know what to do if we ran into trouble. And yes, kids would sometimes drown in these waters when there was no help. So the legend of La Llorona became a tool or scare tactic used by my parents to keep us from getting in the water. The story was that La Llorona, no longer in her right mind and her kids gone, would take whatever kids she would find and claim them as her own. As a child, I interpreted that as this was a crazy evil spirit that was out there roaming the riverbanks, plucking kids that would never be seen or heard from again. That would keep me from swimming.
I love his point. I love his point, though, that he made about, the reality that, like, yeah, they didn't have access to pools, swimming pools and things like that where they were. And so it was really just like you learn how to swim in whatever canals you live nearby. And those were probably like the least safe places to swim as a small child. So this is what our mother had to say. She emailed this story to us. She says, I was never really told the real story behind La Llorona growing up. The only thing I remember hearing from my mom and from other kids and friends in La Colonia was that La Llorona was the ghost of a woman looking for her children who had drowned in a river. We lived close. So if you lived close to any waterfront like we did, they lived close to the Arroyo Colorado that ran behind our home, you could be targeted by La Llorona if you were outside after dark. She would drag you off to the river and drown you like she did her children. The older kids in the neighborhood found great pleasure in scaring those of us that were younger by telling us these stories. She says, I remember one day I was playing with some neighborhood kids. They lived 2 blocks away from our house. We were all sitting under a trailer, like parked on the street, and the older kids started sharing ghost stories. La Llorona, who roamed the streets after dark, crying out, mis hijos, looking for her children who had drowned in the river. So they told her, don't be caught outside after dark because La Llorona will come after you and she's going to drag you off to the arroyo and drown you. These are older kids telling her this. And so she was like all wrapped up listening to them tell the stories. So she lost track of time. She was not aware that day that the sun had gone down and it had started to get dark. So she was very freaked out. She says, I begged the older children there to please walk me down at least 1 block, and then I would run the rest of the way. But they taunted me about getting caught by La Llorona, and they refused to walk with me. But she's like, I had to get home because Mom, our grandma was going to be waiting for her, and she was going to get mad that she'd stayed out so late. So as I walked by myself, I reached the corner where I was going to turn onto our street that we lived on. And one of the older kids with a white sheet over his head ran up to her, grabbed her from behind, and cried out, mis hijos. And so she's like, I looked up, I saw him, I let out a blood-curdling scream, and then I ran as fast as I could to my house, crying the whole way. She's like, I never hung around in the dark anymore after that, and especially not with those kids. She goes, that's a true story. She's like, to this day, I'm still afraid of the dark.
Yes, we should point out that our mother has a very low threshold for scary things. Like those mildest things can give her nightmares.
Yeah, I was reading through that and I was like, pobrecita, what they put her through. Kids suck. Kids are jerks. So yeah, that's straight from our parents, a little bit of the legend. And certainly I grew up, Mom and Dad, I know, probably talked to you and Vanessa, our other sister, about La Llorona. I certainly heard it growing up, and I think I always had the opposite. I think it always had the opposite effect on me that it was supposed to have on small children. I was always like, tell me more. Like, I want to hear more about this woman. But I did want to, before we launch into the film, I did also want to spend some time giving a little bit more background on La Llorona from some of the reading that Ron and I did. Ron and I looked at like a treasure trove of resources on this, and we're going to link that in our episode notes like we always do. We also have a website, screamsister.com, and we're going to have all the resources linked there. I really encourage everybody to please go check it out. So much good information. I had so much fun reading this stuff, and there are so many good books listed in these resources on Mexican folklore. And so I know for me, I'm going to be hunting these down because I really would love to have access to this information. It's important to know everybody like loves La Llorona. And what I mean by that is this is a legend that people just don't quit. All the way from deep into Mexico, across much of what we consider Latin America, and like I said, up into the Southwest United States, certainly here in Texas, people know La Llorona. They may not know the legend, like we said, but they know the name. And I just want to point out, like when people say it's giving mother, I think they're talking about La Llorona. I think La Llorona is mother. She is the ultimate, the icon. I do also want to point out when we were digging around looking for a film to watch on this topic, I came across somewhere between 9 and 11 different films out there right now currently about
There's a lot
about this woman. Yeah. So, I mean, we are obsessed with her. There's also an American based film. I think it's called The Curse of La Llorona. I think it's called The Curse
which
of
I accidentally rented and was like 10 minutes into it before I was like, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's on its own, it's a fun film too. Like I recommend seeing that one if you haven't also, but it's worth noting it is based, I think it's based in California. Like it's a United States based film and it's a lot of fun, but I think it rightly got a little bit of what am I trying to say? I think it got a little bit of dust when it first was going to be coming out because it's like, why would we take a Mexican story and base it somewhere outside of Mexico? That doesn't make sense. And I totally agree. That said, it is, I think, a classic telling of the legend, and it's a fun movie. And there are lots of Hispanic actors in there, and it's really, it was fun. So see that one for sure if you haven't. But yeah, like bunch of films out there. The earliest documentation or accounts of La Llorona can kind of be traced back to as early as the mid 1500s. And we came across multiple resources that sort of had this factoid. So I feel pretty comfortable saying that it's probably true, definitely true enough. Early 1500s, early to mid 1500s. We looked at there's a Library of Congress blog site, and they put out a series of articles on the legend of La Llorona. And so I'm quoting from one of those articles. It says, in Latin America, in Spanish-speaking communities in the U.S., and especially in Mexico, no ghost story is told as often, discussed as enthusiastically, or interpreted as widely as the legend of La Llorona. La Llorona literally means the wailing woman or the weeping woman, so it's not surprising that the main characteristic shared by all stories of La Llorona is that she weeps. And there is a lot of scholarly debate. This was also stuff that we looked at when we looked at these different articles from the Library of Congress blog site. There's a lot of scholarly debate as to the origins of La Llorona. Like, I think the debate is it a Mexican origin story from like indigenous traditions? Are there traces of this story that come by way of Spanish and European influence? One of the really great articles in this series kind of made the case that there's reason to think it might be a combination of both. There are certainly a lot of similarities between La Llorona and aspects of Aztec mythology, for instance. The Aztec goddess associated with like children and motherhood. I'm not even going to attempt her name, and I'm so sorry, but I will have that information in the resource notes. But the Aztec goddess associated with children and motherhood had a lot of similarities with La Llorona as we know her. And it was believed that goddess, who I think is sometimes referred to as demon in certain writings, but Aztec goddess, it's believed that she wandered at night weeping, something along the lines of, "My children, woe is me that I must soon leave you." You know, I think it's probably safe to say that this is extremely old lore that does have origins in Mexico, likely with some European influence as well, because conquistadores be doing conquistadores shit. So
Yeah.
yeah. Another fun thing we came across, there are many songs about La Llorona, and the most well-known of these is one that comes out of the Oaxacan region. So for those of you who have heard a song about La Llorona, odds are the one in your head is the one that we're talking about here, because it's just that is the song from that region, and it's a very well-known song. It's sort of like the universal La Llorona song. If you think of like, I hate to draw on this reference, but it's relevant. Coco, the movie Coco.
I was going to say, that's the one that's in my head. Is that the one you're talking about?
that is the song. Yeah, that is the version. There's variations on the lyrics, but that is the general song that comes out of that region of Mexico. So yeah, and the earliest versions of this song have been found in print dating back to like the 1930s. But it, like I said, it is folklore that is very much kept alive through song and story and tradition. So still to this day, every year in the Xochimilco borough of Mexico City, people commemorate the legend of La Llorona with a performance along some of the canals there, and it coincides with the Dia de los Muertos festivals. So I think that would be awesome. If like, I would love to go
and to see that.
Yeah, to check that out.
Cool.
And then the last thing I'll say is there is a podcast called Folk Life Today from the Library of Congress, and they have a great episode. I didn't listen to it, but I'm plan to. Great episode on La Llorona from 2021. And so we'll be sure to link that for everybody, so you can go and give it a listen and learn a little bit more about the legend. What that brings us to now is it takes us straight into the film that we chose for this episode this week. We will be talking about 2019's La Llorona. We chose the Guatemalan horror film version of this legend. This is directed by Jayro Bustamante and starring María Mercedes Coroy, Sabrina De La Hoz, I'm doing the best I can with these names, by the way, guys. María Telón and Margarita Kenéfic. Again, I'm so sorry if I said that name wrong. It is worth noting, Ron, I don't know if you caught this, but María Mercedes Coroy, you may recognize her. She is Namor's mother in Wakanda Forever.
What is she? I'm trying to remember.
She's
interesting now.
Namor's mother is not like, you see her, she gives birth to baby Namor underwater, so you see her in flashback form. But yeah, she is the woman who plays his mother in Wakanda Forever. So I was like, what I'll go ahead and do now is I'm going to read the synopsis like we always do, and then we'll launch into our thoughts on the film. So the synopsis is: an aging paranoid war criminal and dictator protected by his faithful wife faces death while being haunted by the ghost of his past. He is on trial for orchestrating the brutal genocide of Native Mayans in the early 80s. Side note, so we are to understand that this...
Wait, sorry. My dog just busted into the... I don't know why she keeps doing this. Hold on, let me shove her out.
She loves you.
I don't know why she keeps doing that. I work at home. She never does it when I'm here working, but the minute we do this podcast, she's like...
You know why? Because she's sensitive to the spirits that we're talking about. She's like, don't be talking about La Llorona. Yeah, that's Ronnie's dog, Athena, and she's a sweetheart. But anyway, yes. So he's on trial for orchestrating the brutal genocide of Native Mayans in the early 80s. So like what we're to understand is that this film is taking place more or less during present day time. So we're talking about crimes.
I think it was set in 82, 83.
Okay, yeah, wrote. That's when he was committing the crimes, right? And so now he's finally being brought to account for them. So, okay, so FYI, disclaimer, whatever, major spoilers. We're going to be talking about the film. If you haven't seen it yet, consider
stopping.
Watch
it and then come back.
Watch it and then come back. Yeah, I think it's worth a view, and it's on Amazon Prime right now. You can rent it. Ron, what did you think?
Well, initially I started watching the wrong one, then I had to back out of that one, rent the right one, and then because I didn't realize it was a Guatemalan movie, I thought it was another like set in Spain movie. So when they were like showing the indigenous people, I was like, Spain has indigenous people, which I'm sure they do. I just didn't know what they were. And then I clued in that it's set in Guatemala, but I liked it. It was a little less horror-y to me than some of the other ones we've watched. I would kind of say it's even more like a drama with some supernatural paranormal elements, because there wasn't really any part of it that I thought was like creepy. Like the creepiest part was when she hung off the bunk bed.
Right.
That was creepy. Yeah, just that.
You see her long hair.
Yes, that was creepy. But the rest of it wasn't. I didn't find that creepy, but it was interesting. Yeah, because I was interested in kind of seeing how the Llorona story fit into this story of an aging general who is being accused of genocide. And so in that was kind of a surprise in that it twisted the story a little bit, because obviously every Llorona story that I've ever heard involves she killed her own children, and in this one she didn't. So that took a little twist on it, which I kind of liked actually. It made her more of a proactive, gave her more of a proactive role than she actually does in the folk tale. In the folk tale, she's more just reactive.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole tragedy happens just out of an intense reaction that she has, and in this, I think the director, was his name Bustamante,
Hmm.
gave her a more proactive role.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
liked it. It was just I just thought it was lower on the horror scale than
Yeah.
others. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, this is pitched as a horror film, but yeah, it's not really. If anything, there might be like some psychological horror there going on, because I
Yes,
think,
exactly.
yeah,
hmm
like I think like you're waiting for it to get, but even that, I would say like the pacing of the film was slow enough that I wasn't like
hmm
sitting on the edge waiting for it to get crazy scary.
Yeah, because
So,
I even looked at the running time, because it was a short movie. It's like an hour and 34 minutes or 36 minutes, something like that. And there was one
yeah.
part where I looked at it and it was like, okay, we're almost 40 minutes in, and
No, I know. I was like,
what's gonna happen?
when are we gonna get to see some stuff? But
Yeah,
yeah,
what's this?
so I thought this was really interestingly done, and
hmm
because like immediately through we're watching the so initially where we start is he's going on trial, and maybe like other generals that were working under him are going on trial as well. So it's like this trial where that's televised, it's very public, and we immediately come to understand that he under his regime, so many atrocities have been committed, so many like human
Horrible.
right, yeah, terrible, horrible violations. They've got testimony coming from like some of the indigenous women in the region who experienced this violence. So you're immediately like not on this guy's side at all. And then when he's found guilty through the course of the trial, and then it's promptly overturned by the high court. So then that results in like massive unrests in the streets, days and days of protests outside this guy's house. And so you're kind of immediately on the side of the people. You want vengeance, you want justice for what has happened to these people, and specifically these women. That kind of really jumped out at me as vastly different from anything I had heard growing up. What else? I made this particular note because I thought stylistically, I don't know if this stood out to you, but like I really liked the cinematography of this movie. Very, very different from I guess what I would expect going into a movie about La Llorona. I guess everything is very almost blindingly white and
Yeah, it's like
stark.
almost bleached out. Like the color
Yeah,
has kind of been bleached out. I mean, it's not black and white, but it's just like the colors are very muted. Like it's been bleached out.
yeah, very
hmm
stark color palette, which is a weird choice, I think, for the horror genre. Normally you've got
hmm
dark corners, dark shades, and things that happened under cover of night, and this is very different. And I kind of interpreted that as like the sins of his past, the ghosts that haunt him, like they're very much out in the open. They don't need to hide under the cover of night.
hmm
They're out there. There's no
That's a good
escaping
point.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then and like right on down to like the way that the general's wife, whose name is Carmen, and his daughter, the adult daughter, who's a physician. What was her name? I don't
I
remember
was
her
gonna,
name.
I don't know. I didn't write
The
it down.
the
I don't
granddaughter's name
know.
is Sarah, but
Sarah.
I
Yeah.
don't remember the name of the daughter, but she's a
And the
physician.
maid's name is Valeriana, but
Valeriana. Yeah. So, but like
maybe they never said.
even the general's wife and his daughter, like if you notice, they're and all the interior shots, they're wearing lots of beiges, lots of whites, very
hmm
bland, very crisp lines. And I think like the severity of all of that together adds an extra creepy factor. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you guys ever got around to seeing Get Out, Jordan Peele's Get
I
Out.
No, I didn't. Robert did, but I didn't.
You need to see that, Veronica. It's so good. But Alice, well, I can't talk about it now because you haven't seen it. But but there's a great scene that I think kind of identifies that for me. Like there's something very unnerving and harsh about the sterility of like white walls and expressionless faces and clothes that match that. There's something kind of sadistic about it. And when
That
you
is
watch Get Out, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
that is true now that you point that out, because like nobody ever in this movie ever, like in terms of facial expressions, there never really were any.
There
Everybody
weren't
was
any.
just,
It was just like,
yeah, no
and
extremes of anger or, well, I mean, the protesters were angry, but even them, there was no like visual facial cues. It was just kind of all very
it
almost
was like,
monotone.
it was very like placid and calm, and the chaos, whatever chaos they were experiencing on the inside,
Mm,
which I think the camera, again, the cinematography, I thought really captured well, because the camera kind of lingers on these moments with the actors, so that we can see they're processing what's happening in the story, but they're doing it, like I said, very much behind calm, neutral faces, but you can see it in like the eyes or whatever. So I think there's a lot of storytelling happening in this movie in the moments where there's very little dialogue. And there is very little dialogue throughout a lot of the movie. I got this feeling like there's not a whole lot of dialogue, but it is a
mm-mm.
whole lot of emoting in the between moments. Yeah, like the other thing I wanted to make sure I talked about, the introduction of Alma into the storyline. You want to like tell people who you want to tell, what is it that brings Alma to them? Kind of, it's worth saying the house staff are all indigenous, so they are
Yeah,
all.
they're all Mayan Isil. I don't know how to pronounce that.
I have it.
Ixal. Yeah, but they're all Mayan, basically of descent. And
Cachiquel
gotcha.
Maya. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the beginning of the story, or not far into the story, like all the staff that they have to start off with pretty much quit. Like they sense, bad things are happening.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of weirded out. They want out. So the only one that stays behind is Valeriana, who's like the one that's been with them the longest. I think at one point she says she's been there with them for 27 years. So pretty much all of her life. So everybody quits. And it's
Mm-hmm.
this big house, of course. And so one day after the general has been, his guilty verdict been annulled, overturned, this girl, this young woman, probably looks to be like early 20s, shows up at the house one day, and she's expected because Valeriana, the longtime maid, seems to be expecting her, but that's how she kind of just suddenly appears and is there to help. Acts very strange from the get-go, it's one thing that always strikes me in scary movies, is that people never seem to react when people are acting weird.
When
Like
there's something very off.
she hardly ever, I don't think she says anything for a while. She just kind of, stares. She doesn't smile. It's just
Yeah.
very odd. And nobody ever comments on something's not right here.
Exactly. And that's like part of it. So like her intro into the storyline, the first time we see her, it's when the general is standing out at the window and he's watching the
Mhm.
protests that have been, like I said, going on for days now, which power to these people for, I mean, just like loud protests that you hear throughout the entire course of the movie, day and night. They do not,
Yeah.
it sort of was like no justice, no peace. So they just keep it going the entire time. And I was so inspired by that. I was like,
Yeah.
man,
And
that's what.
they're all holding up pictures of like loved ones that they've lost or that are missing or that have been
Yeah,
killed.
because aside from the genocide that this man committed, he's also like he's disappeared a bunch of people. Anybody who was a disruptor or someone who was maybe a threat to his regime, they disappeared so many people. So
Hmm.
there's so many people who are just gone, and they're like, we want our people back. But anyway, the first time we meet her, he's standing at the window, he's watching these protests, and she emerges from the crowd and makes her way all the way up to the front of the demonstration, like in front of the armed guards. And you see it kind of happen in slow motion. And she has like an unobstructed path straight to the front. So like we as the audience know right off the bat, there is something off about this woman. Like she's making eye contact with the general. She knows exactly where he is in the window. So you know that this woman is coming potentially to like right a horrific wrong. So basically, yeah, that's how we first meet Alma, who comes into the story. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to say before we get into like the final half hour of the film, because the final 30 minutes I feel is like
Yeah, that's where it really picked up.
where this movie happens.
I will say that the character that I actually found the most interesting was the wife. What you said her name was Carmen?
Carmen, yeah.
Um, because initially I didn't like her at all because she just
Yes.
seemed like one of those rich,
Awful women. She's awful.
awful
Yeah.
women who really knows what's going on, but they just turn a blind eye because as long as it doesn't interfere with their lifestyle, they don't care. And then as the movie went on, you kind of see her start to she starts having these dreams that at first I was kind of confused. I was like, what's going on with these dreams? And then it becomes clear that in her dreams, she is experiencing, at first I thought she was just experiencing like the things that the women that were giving testimony in the beginning of the movie, experiencing what they went through during the genocide and the killings. And then later, what she's actually experiencing is what happened to Alma herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so through those dreams, it kind of strips away, she can't deny anymore. She can't turn away from it.
Yeah.
So she really just comes to, and so she's actually the tool that finally administers justice, and rightly so.
I know.
At the end, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
So I went from like hating her to then, feeling empathy for her to then at the end, just like yes, do it.
Yeah, she kind of ended up being like one of the most interesting characters in the film because I don't feel like the daughter did much of anything. The adult daughter,
No.
like she just, I think she had some awareness that maybe her father wasn't a good guy, but beyond that, she never takes action. She never really does anything. Carmen, the wife, like at the beginning of the film, she was really just to describe the women, the indigenous women who got up and gave testimony about the atrocities committed. She describes them as putas, which is, calls them whores.
Yeah.
Basically diminishing their testimony, saying that they were, she's like, if people will say anything if you pay them enough. So implying that they were lying multiple times. Like every time she said this word, I noted that it felt very deliberate, but just she used the term savages when referring either to indigenous community members or the protesters outside. So again, like just a terrible slur. She calls the staff, as they're talking about wanting to flee because they're afraid, she calls them all ungrateful. So yeah, like right off the bat, you get an understanding of what kind of woman this person is, and she's awful. So I find it was a really interesting choice to make her the vessel through which we're going to get the story of what happened to Alma. And it kind of acts as like a enlightenment for her and causes rage within her that she can no longer deny because she's now experienced it firsthand through the dreams. So I thought that was a really awesome, amazing choice. And yeah, and that doesn't come till like the last 30 minutes of the movie, talking about the ending. So in the last 30 minutes of the movie, it's all going down. The protesters. Well, so let's back up. The guard that has been in the house with them this whole time, protecting
what happened
them.
To him? I'm confused.
I don't know what happened to him.
He walks off with those.
So the children that show up, we learn are Alma's children. She has a little boy and a little girl, and we learn that those are her children that show up, and they lead him off somewhere. And we do not see him again.
Never see him again.
Did he die? I don't know. Like I was expecting that they were going to walk him into the pool outside and like drown him, but we don't find out. And so then suddenly we start seeing people showing up. This is nighttime. We start seeing people showing up in their yard. And I didn't know if these were like ghosts, like the ghosts of all the people he's disappeared.
That's what I understood.
Yeah. That's kind of how I took it.
That's what my interpretation of it, because I don't think it would have been the protesters from outside.
Yeah.
And I think the children, the spirits of Alma's children led the guard away. Latona? What was his name? Something like that. I think it's
Latona, yeah.
Because obviously the wife Carmen would not have been able to do what she did at the end of the movie if the guard had been there. So I think the children, I choose to think they didn't kill him. They just, because he didn't do anything. He was too young to have been part of the genocide. So, I mean, in that aspect, he was innocent. He's just the bodyguard, the security guard. So I choose to believe that they just kind of drew him away so that he wouldn't be around for what was going to happen.
Yeah. That makes sense. Because if you pay attention, like come to think of it, nobody else dies in the movie except what we're about to talk about with what happens to the general. So it's like Carmen doesn't die, and neither does his daughter or his granddaughter. But so anyway, we start to see these ghosts of people that he's disappeared appearing in the house grounds, like they've broken through whatever protection was out there. And so Valeriana and the granddaughter, Carmen, the wife, they all gather in a circle. I think at this point, the general is also having like some sort of like cardiac event, or maybe I'm making that up. Something's happening to him, but they gather him.
They sedated him. She sedated him.
Oh, that's right. She sedated. Yeah, because
he was
off firing his gun like a loony bird and accidentally almost shoots and kills his granddaughter. But anyway,
she sedated him.
She
Which
sedated
kind of
him.
sucks because then when final justice is being administered, he's not
He's
aware.
not cognizant. Yeah. But okay, so they gather in a prayer circle because they're praying for protection. They're aware that these ghosts are appearing, people that are not of this world. So Valeriana starts leading them in a prayer for protection. And then that is where Carmen has the vision where essentially she's transported back to the moment that it all changes for Alma, and we learn what happens to Alma. We learn that she had been trying to run away from the soldiers and protect her children and hide her children. They're pulled out by the soldiers. She's dragged up by the hair. They have her boy and her girl. They take them to the river, and the general orders the soldiers to bring Alma to her. So they drag her by the hair over to the general, and the general's threatening her with a gun in her face, saying, he's accusing her of her and her husband or lover, who is the father of the children. He's accusing them of being guerrilla soldiers against the regime, whatever. And she's saying, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not any of that. I don't know where my husband is. He's not that. We're not that. And he's threatening to drown their children, and she's calling out for them. And so how it ends is that essentially she is calling out for her children as these soldiers are drowning them. And then the general shoots her in the head. And so she is not, in this story, La Llorona is not the one who killed her children.
Right.
It was this dictator and his soldiers. And she obviously was shot in the river. So we realize then that like La Llorona, Alma does not exist. Alma is a ghost that essentially that showed up for justice, for vengeance. And in that moment, in the dream sequence, when Carmen learns this, she looks up at her husband and just like lunges at him and drowns him, starts choking and drowning him in the water, except that it's not really in the water. She is in fact killing him right there in the prayer circle. So I was just like, yeah.
And then it shows them at her, at the funeral, and the grandmother's there, and the daughter, the granddaughter, the housekeeper. So that she got away with it because obviously the only witnesses was that group of women, and nobody's saying anything, and I was perfectly fine with that.
Yeah. Well, and I also thought it was interesting that it's like once we pan to the real scene, which is them in the prayer circle, none of them are stopping her. Like nobody's trying to stop her from choking her husband.
No, they're just watching while he's doing it. And then, of course, the very, very end after the funeral scene, you see one of the general's like officers that was also party to all this, horrible genocidal killings and rapings. And I don't know where he is, but he's somewhere, and he suddenly starts hearing a woman crying. So know that she's moving on. She's going to get them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point or another, she's going to get them all. Yeah.
I love that concept. And so, yeah, like I sat with the end of this film. After the ending of this film, I kind of sat on the couch for a long time, and I was just sort of looking at the screen and just thinking about it. And it was really, I thought it was just not your typical scary movie, not traditional trappings of like jump scares and stuff like that, but it gives you a lot to think about. And
no, it's real life horror, because when I was telling my husband Robert about the premise of the movie, he said, "Oh, well then it sounds like he modeled the general after a real life Guatemalan general who was tried for war crimes, whose name was, I had to look him up, General Efren Rios Montt, Montt, who was a high-ranking general in Guatemala who served as interim president of Guatemala during that time frame, like 82, 83, was convicted of genocide and war crimes, was sentenced to 80 years, but then the Constitutional Court of Guatemala overturned it. And so he just eventually died of old age at 91, I think around 2018. So kind of in a way, maybe the director of this movie, Jayro Bustamante, kind of, because obviously this is who the general in this movie is, administered justice through this movie.
That's pretty cool. I didn't
very
know
real
that.
life. Yeah, I didn't know that either till I was telling Robert about the story, and he was, because Robert, he's always knows all this political stuff, and he's always very particularly honed into the history of Latin America. But yeah, he was like right away, he's like, oh, well, there was a real life general, and this sounds like exactly like him. So
yeah, I mean, I thought it was really, really well. I thought it was well done. I came across a comment, like I went looking, a comment where somebody said, some like random moron dude who was like, the American version was better. And then somebody like quote tweeted him or whatever and was like, you need to like, I want you to just read that out loud to yourself. The American version of a Mexican folklore story was somehow better. Like, no, that's a bunch of crap. So I really thought this was interestingly done. And it got me thinking about like what I wrote down is the idea that what we're told is that La Llorona is a woman who went mad and killed her own children and is now damned to wander forever in search of children to claim. But like, what if that is
sounds like a story a man made up?
Exactly. And that's what if we made La Llorona the villain through the passage of time, as we are so fond of making villains of women since the beginning of time, and it's just the story that we get told to cover up corruption and the deeds of men doing very bad things. You know, what if all this time La Llorona is not the monster we make her out to be, and she was a victim? Like, what if that's the truth? So I thought that was really interesting, the way they turn the legend on its head and force us to look at it in a different light.
Yeah, it was a nice take on it. And on a totally superficial note, Carmen the wife, I loved her hair.
I know.
Like that's what I want my hair to look like when it's totally gray.
I know. The dream is to continue to have thick, healthy hair well into old age. You know, whatever the shade, gray, black, brown, whatever your shade of hair, but just thick, healthy hair. That's what I want as I get older. I really liked it. I didn't know how you were going to feel about it. I'm glad that it sounds like you also liked it. Two thumbs up. I thought this was a great version. If you haven't seen it, I think you should give it a look. I think it really, it's just a different take, and it's one that I have not seen before. So, you know, that, like I said, there's countless La Llorona movies out there. I think they probably all follow similar tracks, and this one is dramatically different. Yeah,
but definitely more psychological. So don't go in expecting like full
jump
blown
scares
horror.
and stuff like that. I'm back on Elm Street Corner. Welcome to Elm Street Corner, the temporary segment here of Scream Sister, where I will be spending this episode and one more episode talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Because fun fact about me is that I have made it to adulthood, having never seen in any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, because I just sort of convinced myself early on that they were going to be too scary, and then I just never touched it any other time going forward. I've already seen the first film, so our last episode we talked about the movie Veronica, but I also spent a little bit of time talking about my thoughts on the first film for Nightmare on Elm Street. I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. So today I'm going to be talking about films 2 and 3. And I think it's good to kind of talk about them as a unit, but then also individually. So firstly, I do want to say, Veronica, I made the mistake of I should have spaced this out more, because I made the mistake of not giving, I think you should space out your Freddy Krueger films a little bit better than I did. So I did 2 nights in a row of back-to-back Freddy Krueger. So it's like speed dating Freddy Krueger, and it's a lot.
It all runs together.
It's like I'm taking in a lot about this person, you know, or in this case, a resurrected serial killer. But so I not next week, but week after, when we talk about films 4 and 5, I will be taking a break after that, everybody. Freddie and I will be on a break. So, we're on a break. This second one, the sequel, Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Revenge, came out in 1985. For whatever reason, in my head, I thought we were going to be jumping. I don't know why, but I just sort of imagined we were going to be jumping into the 90s by the time we got to film 2. But that's dumb. The first one came out in 84. So yeah, 1 year later, we're now in 85. This was an interesting film. Ron, did you see this one when it came out? Do you remember it?
I might when you start talking about the plot. I know I watched Dream Warriors. I don't know which number that was.
That was number 3. So yeah, we'll get to that 3. One.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you start talking about the plot, then then I'll know if I saw it or not.
Well, man, this plot was out there. So look, when you put it in context with the first.
Wait, is this the one where is number 2 the one where we find out his lineage?
No, that's 3. That's 3.
Okay.
Unless there's more that we learn in 4 and 5. But yeah, we learn a lot in 3. I wouldn't say we learned too much in 2.
Okay.
I would say in context of the first 3 films in this franchise, which is all that I've seen at this point. So I'm only commenting on what I've seen. Freddy's Revenge, this film 2, feels like the one most like out of place within the confines of whatever story it is that we're trying to tell right now. And that's not to say it wasn't fun. I had a lot of fun. It's definitely stays bizarre and twisted. A lot of really good moments and comedic moments. You know, I don't know if it was meant to be comedic at the time that it came out, but you definitely pick up the humor now as a woman in my 40s. But it kind of felt like, I would say Freddy's Revenge kind of feels like the one that you could pull out almost as its own thing, or maybe like a great piece of fan fiction. So this one, Veronica, the main character in this movie is Jesse. So we don't have a final girl, we have a final boy, which I thought was a nice breakaway from tradition. And he's living in what used to be Nancy's house. So I thought that's a nice tie into the first film's heroine, although like Nancy is not in the second one, which I was kind of bummed about, but she's not in the second installment. So the movie centers around him, and we're smack dab in the middle of the 80s. So at this point, we're like peak 80s fashions, which I have a soft spot for. I don't know why, but I've always just loved that. So like any movie centered in this time, I'm automatically already going to be a fan of. I did some reading after watching this particular film. And the thing to know about Freddy's Revenge is that it's kind of become a cult classic for the LGBTQIA community. There's a 2009 list that can be found on, I guess it's called crack.com, naming it as number 1 on a list of the 5 most unintentionally gay horror movies. So I mean, I would say after watching this, after having watched it, that, you know, I don't know about number 1 because I don't know what other movies are on that list, but I think that definitely tracks. I think if there's a list of beloved gay horror movies out there, then it makes sense that this one is on there. I get it. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it in its own right. But if I had any beefs at all, it would be that I don't think we had enough Freddy in this one. There's a lot of Freddy working through Jesse, which is kind of a departing choice, I think, from what the rest of the franchise has been so far. So Jesse, like, I guess we're supposed to be perceived that he's like, Freddy is the inner voice that he's battling, that he's like duking it out with. Freddy's wanting to take control of Jesse and make him commit murder and make him bad. So Jesse's perceived as the one going around terrorizing people and killing people. And then when we do get Freddy, I think we got him in a way that kind of took out that twisted element that works so well for the film's concept. Because I think, like, one of the things that I think is really cool about Nightmare on Elm Street is the idea that we don't know you wouldn't know the difference between a dream and reality. And you wouldn't be able to necessarily wake yourself up from a dream. And also the idea that if you die in a dream, you die in real life. So I think that kind of psychological terror is fun as a film concept. But in the movie,
I never saw this one.
Okay. So, but in the movie, we don't really see Freddy in that space. Freddy's primary scenes in this movie don't happen in a dream. They happen in real life. So there's a scene towards the end where Jesse's would-be girlfriend is having a pool party, and he shows up at the pool party and starts killing people and starts chasing kids around the pool. And he's already killed a few kids at this point when he looks at all of the remaining kids at this party, all teenagers, and he says, "You're all my children now," or something like that. But then he just disappears. He just like goes into the bushes and we don't see him again until the end of the film. But so anyway, like, I think pulling Freddy out of the dream world and putting him in reality too much kind of makes him less scary, in my opinion.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, it was still fun. I still enjoyed it. But then
I think all of the like old horror franchises all had at least one movie that just didn't. It's like, you know, that old Sesame Street. Which one of these doesn't belong? It didn't fit with the canon. Like even Halloween had that one. I think it was this. I don't remember which one, but there was one called Season of the Witch, which had nothing to do with Michael Myers. So
yeah.
I think they all have at least one movie that is like, well, it doesn't go in this franchise.
Like kind of just a standalone. Yeah, like its own standalone thing. But so then we get into Dream Warriors. So Dream Warriors is Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And that came out in 1987.
I was a senior in high school.
Okay. So I wrote, this feels more like a return to form and more of, I guess, a classic sequel in the vein of what we think of when we think about sequels. It ties directly into the concept of what we know about Freddy, a man tormenting teens through their dreams. It takes a deeper dive into the origin story for Freddy, so we learn more about how he came to be. And then we get the return of a central first film character, and that's Nancy. We get Nancy back, which I thought was so cool. I really, again, having not seen these films when Scream came out, and now watching these films, it just better informs Scream for me in a lot of ways, because I think there's a lot of things that Scream borrows from these films. So anyway, we get a nice evolution of the storyline in terms of what's happening to these teenagers, because in movie 1, it's like a core group of kids that are having bad dreams, and it's kind of very easy to sort of write that off as like one-offs. It's like, we don't know what's happening with these kids. They're just, whatever, hopped up on drugs or whatever it is that we're accusing them of, not being pious and virtuous enough, whatever. But in this film, we've kind of got to take that and kind of establish a category to lump these children into. So we've basically categorized these teens as suicidal. And that allows us to say, okay, well, we need to have some sort of medical intervention. Even though we know that's not true, we know it's Freddy. It allows us to pull in that element of like a psych ward or a mental health facility, which is a big trope in the horror genre. Even though it's not, I would say, the way that mental health facilities and people who are battling mental illness, I would say that the way that they are portrayed in horror films is typically very unfair, inaccurate, and kind of harmful. But
this was also back in the 80s, so
yeah, it is what it is. This was
a different mindset back then.
Different mindset back then. So yeah, and then also part of Freddy's big origin story reveal is that we meet his mother. We meet Freddy Krueger's mother, Amanda Krueger, and through her we get that religious tie-in that we talked about on this podcast already, because particularly through Catholicism, because in this case she is a nun. She's her nun name is Sister Mary Helena. I don't know how you would say Helena, Sister Mary. But anyway, we learn that is the mother of Freddy Krueger. It was definitely a great sequel. The other thing that I would say was nice about this, I thought it was a nice slasher factor. I thought that in the rules of sequels, the body count is supposed to be higher, and it's supposed to be more graphic, more blood, more gore. I don't necessarily know that it was more graphic, but fun, interesting deaths. I thought that the way that Freddy Krueger offs people in this movie was very novel and interestingly done.
I remember feeling, I don't remember like specific plot points necessarily, but I just remember being disappointed because, the movie's called Dream Warrior. So I thought, all right, I'm going to see some kids fighting back and kicking Freddy's butt. And for a lot of them, it didn't work out very well,
didn't,
I recall.
Yeah. Going into the final leg of the film, you really do wonder who's going to make it, because it's like it's all these kids that are the Dream Warriors, and okay, well, some of them aren't going to make it, and in fact they do not. We lose a number of them. But yeah, I thought it was fun. Even like Freddy's Revenge, the second one, I thought that was a little light on slasher deaths and graphic violence or whatever. So I thought this movie was more of a return to that. The other thing, spoiler alert for anyone who still hasn't seen this movie, Nancy dies. I was so pissed. She dies in this movie. I haven't seen other films, so I don't know if she stays dead, but as far as I know, end of film 3, she is dead, and I'm very bummed about that. But I liked it a lot. Of the 3 that I've seen so far, this is probably my favorite one. And I wrote shout out to Patricia Arquette and Lawrence Fishburne. They're in this film. So
that's right.
Yeah,
I'd forgotten.
I don't know if they were big. I don't know if they were big names yet at the time that it came. Okay,
no, that was probably one of their early works.
Yeah, but so it was cool to see them in it, and I was like, man, if Lawrence Fishburne gets killed, I'm gonna be pissed, and he doesn't get killed, so I'm glad.
Morpheus dies in a dream.
How very ironic. I was gonna say poetic, but no, not poetic.
Morpheus dies in a dream.
Like I said, probably my favorite that I've seen so far. So when we come back week after next, I will be wrapping up with films 4 and 5, and then that'll be
I'll close the books because I never watched those, so yeah, I'll check them out.
I haven't seen anything about them, so I'm excited. So just a reminder for everybody, currently Veronica and I are reading Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. It is a horror novel. I did not check to see when this horror novel came out, but it's a big read. So if you haven't started it yet, please do. We're inviting everybody to join in with us. read this book along with us, and then we will be discussing it, I think end of September, maybe early October. We'll see. I'm almost like halfway through, and I'm enjoying it so far. Read it with us. Email us your thoughts, email us your questions, screamsisterpod@gmail.com. But yeah, we're making our way through that book slowly but surely.
Other than that book, I had been listening to this audiobook, just like a light, fluffy historical mystery. I think it's called A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poisons. Was really enjoying the audiobook, was enjoying the story. The characters, they were cute. So I went to go look to buy the second book. And in reading some of the reviews, I realized it's heading towards love triangle territory. So my interest immediately plummeted. Like I haven't even finished the audiobook of the first book that I had been enjoying because my interest just took a nosedive because I do not do love triangle. I'm out.
For the people, because it's not just love triangles. I think that you also are leery of romance elements in a lot of books. So can you explain for the people why that is, or what it is that sort of? Because I'm curious. You've talked to me a little bit about it before, but it's just
not
like
that it's not
when
that
it's
I
not
mind.
done well.
Yes, and I have it's a very fine line for me for what's done well. I do not like love triangles. I do not like insta love. I like a slow burn. But if people cannot be declaring love for each other or undying loyalty when they've had exchanged 3 sentences or they've known each other for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are immediate turnoffs. And I never like the romance to overtake the rest of the story. I like it to be a nice B or C plot. I don't like it to be the main plot. So I'm just very picky about it, and it's very easy for it to go wrong. So most of the time it goes wrong. But other than that, I found this channel that's 24/7 Dateline episodes. So I've been glued to that. It's just I'll finish one and I'll be ready to turn it off, and the next one will start. I'm like, oh my God, I have to know who did it.
Well, you know what else I would say I have figured out about you over the years is that you're not a fan of a romance plot if that is going to completely derail the rest of the story.
I don't read romance books. Books where it's the romance is the main thing. No, not interested.
Or it's if the mission is to save your family or group of friends from zombies, but you are failing in that effort because you are so hung up on the love you feel for some person in particular. I think that's the kind of thing that would drive you crazy because you're don't abandon the mission just to stay with Janet, Kevin.
Yeah.
Save the people that you're meant to be saving.
Let's not have the first kiss happen when the whole world is going to shit. And it's there is a time and a place, and this is not it. So.
I was going to ask you, have you ever read this? This has nothing to do with what you just said, but it just popped up on my phone. Have you ever read this book called The Fifth Season?
Yes. I've read the first book in that trilogy and the second book. I still have to read the third one.
Okay, because it popped up on my phone today because there was The Atlantic put out a list of books, books that aim to grab the reader's attention. I guess books you can't put down or something, books that you won't be distracted, you won't get distracted from reading. And one of them was the Sixth Sense, The Fifth Season, which
by
came out
M.K. Jemisin,
which came out in 2015.
I liked it obviously because I've read the second book. I just have to get around to the third one.
It seems it's more is it sci-fi?
It's
So this is what it says. It says the story takes place on a supercontinent called the Stillness that is on the verge of its regular apocalypse known as the Fifth Season.
I wouldn't call it sci-fi. I'd call it more
post-apocalyptic,
fantasy, but low fantasy with dystopian type elements,
themes. Okay,
yeah,
cool. So that one came up. There was also
really cool twist.
Okay, well, so we're talking about it in terms of if there are books that you guys are if you're looking for something to read, The Fifth Season kind of came up as a cool book. There's another book that came up on this list called Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado that came out in 2017. And Carmen Maria Machado is kind of a sci-fi fantasy horror writer. So this is a collection of short stories by her that's supposed to be pretty great. And then Veronica, just this past week, Isabel Cañas, her second book, Vampires of El Norte, is finally out. This is the book that I had been texting you about since beginning of this year. So she is the woman who wrote The Hacienda, which is one of the reads I enjoyed most last year. And so I was really excited about this Vampires of El Norte coming out. Came out Tuesday last week. So I'm going to definitely be picking that up am putting that on my list of books that I like. It's like a growing list of books that I haven't read.
It grows. I've got hundreds. I just have to acknowledge that I just have to face the fact that I'm not gonna live long enough to read all the books that are on my TBR list.
Yeah,
and then of course at the movies, they have. I had never heard of it, but we were at the movies the other day with the kids to watch that latest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie, and I saw a poster for The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Yes,
which is a Dracula.
Yeah,
story. The story of Dracula coming over from Romania or wherever.
And I was kind of on the fence about it because I didn't know like what it's kind of an obscure movie, but Guillermo del Toro kind of gave it a 2 thumbs up. So I was like, well, I mean that might definitely be worth checking out. So yeah, that one's out.
Cool. Have you ever seen? Speaking of Guillermo del Toro, have you ever seen Pan's Labyrinth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that one was very, very interesting, beautiful. That was my first introduction to him as a filmmaker, and so I thought that was the way that Guillermo del Toro does storytelling, and his monsters in particular, the creatures that are in his films, is so very cool to me, and something that I would aspire to someday be able to write stories that create things like that. Like you saw Crimson Peak, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's sort of another good example, like the monsters, I should say. I don't know that they're monsters, but the creatures in his films that he creates are just so cool. His imagination is so awesome. I'm still kind of working my way through his Cabinet of Curiosities anthology series on Netflix. I'm a big fan of his monsters. I think his monsters are awesome. That about wraps it up for us. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed talking about Mexican folklore, and if we can find movies that sort of tie into that, it's really good conversation to me. So hopefully you enjoyed it. You can find us online. We are at screamsister.com. We are also on Instagram at screamsister. Like I said, you can email us, screamsisterpod@gmail.com. If you like what you've heard, please, we are still a brand new podcast. The way for us to circulate and find our community is for you to give us a rate, give us a review, tell your friends, tell your fam, share us with everybody that you know that loves spooky movies and books. And we definitely hope to have you back with us when we are back week after next. Oh, what's our tagline? What do we say?
Have we come up with one?
Something about sleep with the light on. Yeah. And if you feel so inclined, don't forget to sleep with the light on. That's right. Okay.
We'll get it. We're going to nail it one of these days.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Scream Sister is a Nest production hosted by me, Valerie, and Veronica. Editing by me. Production support for this episode provided by Lorenzo Villarreal and Alex Street.